This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta. With Syngenta, you can count on quality support that's tailored to meet your goals. Their experts are available online, over the phone, and in person to offer agronomic advice and help you find the best solutions to your challenges. Every interaction is with a qualified Syngenta employee committed to your operations' growth and success.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, December 24th. Wow, the last word episode for 2025 and the day before Christmas. On this episode of the Word, recharge. Long-term matters that makes things do matter longer than you think. We have some cool stuff to talk about that I wasn't aware of. We do have a bit of agronomy, but not going to be the focus of this episode. And at the end of the episode, man, knowledge, so much knowledge. Why can't I have more? Let's go! Yes, so it is December 24th. This is the last episode of Wheat Pete's Word for the year 2025. We will be back in January. I believe it might be January 7th, if I'm not mistaken. But I actually didn't look at a calendar, so whatever that Wednesday is in January, we will start again. And I want to start this episode with a huge thank you to all of the Wheat Pete's Word community, because you are a community, and actually to the Real Agriculture community, because you guys are incredible. But this podcast, Wheat Pete's Word, that I love to do so much, it doesn't work if I don't get feedback and if we don't have people listening. It's a bit like, why would you bother doing this if you're not having any impact? So a huge thank you. Whether you're just what we call a lurker in the background, listening to the odd episode and kind of going, oh, that Wheat Pete guy, how do you tolerate that guy? All the way up to the excellent people like Nature Nut Nick and Dr. Dave Hooker. And, there's too many to mention, but those people who give me regular feedback and say, hey, Peter, I think you're wrong on this one. Or, hey, Peter, you might have said that incorrectly. Or, hey, Peter, that was a great episode. It is just so awesome. People come up to me at meetings or see me out somewhere and just say hi. That's awesome. So thank you so much to everyone involved in the Word, and also to the people here at Real Agriculture that make it possible. Lindsay Smith, Jay Strovey, Sean Haney, the owner. You are an incredible community, and I love doing this so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, it is the Christmas season, and so please, if you can at all, you just, we're going to do the 5 R's, right? We talk lots about these R's. So here's Pete's 5 R's for the Christmas holidays, the holiday season. Rest, relax, rejuvenate, recharge, because you gotta be ready to rumble once we hit 2026. And reconnect. And reconnect may well be the most important. Take the time, family, friends, acquaintances, just get connected with them again, because we humans are social beings, and that social aspect is just so important. But the recharge is also incredibly important, because virtually nobody can run 197%, and most farmers run at what seems to be more than 100%. Yeah, we can't do it forever. So recharge, reconnect. Use your Wheat Pete's 15 this holiday season. Pick up the phone and just call somebody and talk to them for that 15 minutes. You will make their day, I guarantee it. And it might just brighten your day as well. Also, be kind. It never ceases to amaze me what kind of stress people are under that you might just happen to chat with. And sometimes nothing, but There's lots of stress out there, and you don't know what stress that person is that you're talking to, and maybe they didn't respond to you the way you wanted. Be kind, because they probably have stressors in their life that you're not aware of. Enough on that. That's Wheat Pete's philosophical musings for the end of 2025. They're incredibly important, but let's move on. So here's some really interesting things. The ramifications long term of what we do, we just do not understand. And I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, or if not, I meant to. But the broad Bach trials at Rothamsted, and I know I go back to these fairly frequently, but the amount they have learned is incredible. So they saved soil samples all the way through from those trials, and they've gone back and reanalyzed them. And you will often see people quote in the media that, fertilizers reduce organic matter. Fertilizers are bad, bad, bad. Yeah, it's a huge frustration for an agronomist like Wheat Pete, because it's simply not true. Can they be overused? Absolutely. I actually clicked on an article recently, and the author said that, nitrogen fertilizers cause the soil to be sterile and compacted and poor structure. And that is true. If you go crazy with the amount of nitrogen, they used anhydrous ammonia in World War II to make runways on Pacific islands. But the rate they put on was at soil sterilization rates, like, I don't know what it was, 100 times what you'd ever do in a field situation, maybe 1,000 times. And remember that the dose makes the poison. So here's some really phenomenally interesting information from the broad Bach studies that have been going since, I think, the 1860s. And in that study, when they went back and reanalyzed the soil samples, where they fertilized the crop, they increased soil organic carbon. So soil organic matter, if you will. They measure soil as soil organic carbon, and organic matter is 58% soil organic carbon. So if you transferred these numbers into organic matter, they would be even bigger. But the interesting thing is that it took 30 years before they saw any increase whatsoever. And we talk about long-term research trials being, 5 years. That's a long time. To get anything longer than that is, funding for that is virtually impossible. But in those trials, no change whatsoever in the first 30 years. But over time, what they found was where they added phosphorus fertilizer, the soil organic carbon increased by 13% versus where they did not add phosphorus fertilizer. Where they added nitrogen, the organic carbon increased by 21%. And if they added both nitrogen and phosphorus, they increased organic carbon by 28% after that 30-year period. And then it just kept climbing. And so this concept that fertilizer is bad for the soil is 100% wrong. What it does is it increases crop growth. Is that not what we are after? Yes, it is. But when you increase crop growth, then you increase the amount of organic matter, the amount of residues, the amount of root exudates that go back into that soil. And when you do that, you get higher soil organic carbon. So this is like phenomenally interesting. It reminds me of, on my own farm, we did the Roots Not Iron project. We did it on many sites, but we did that for, I believe it was 11 years, at least 9 years, maybe 11 years, and all the way through. So that was the trial where we didn't do any cover cropping or, just whatever rotation I did. And nothing after the wheat. It's kind of the poorest situation in a decent rotation. And then we did the best management practices where we seeded the red clover after the wheat, and we did minimum tillage. And if the clover didn't catch, we'd seed oats after the wheat. And then we did the roots knot iron treatment, which was where we kept something living there all the time. When the soybeans came off, the wheat got planted. When the wheat came off, we got a cover crop planted. When the corn came off, or even before the corn came off, we would seed cereal rye. And in 11 years, there was nothing there. Oh my gosh, you would just kind of pull your hair out. And the roots knot iron actually yielded less sometimes because that green material when we planted the corn would just be a bad news situation. We've talked about that. What was phenomenally interesting was, I think it was 4 years after the end of that trial, and I had corn planted there, and you could see every treatment show up 15 years after we started doing the trial. And you just go, wow, the long-term ramifications. And so people like my good friend Woody, a great word supporter, and Woody just says, man, I'm trying all these things and I can't seem to make a difference. Maybe we're just not waiting long enough to see some of those outcomes. So yes, the long-term ramifications matter. And by the way, the long-term ramifications matter not only with what we do with the soil, but also with your words. It is funny how some people will come up to me and say, you know, Peter, you said X 5, 10, 12, 15 years ago, and I heard that and I tried this and it has made a difference. And so that, yeah, both with what you do to the soil and what you do with people, the long-term ramifications matter way more than we realize. Okay, move on. That was actually a little bit philosophical, wasn't it? I thought I was done philosophical earlier, but maybe not quite. Here's a cool thing that I had no idea was happening. So in Western Canada in the spring wheat crop, wheat stem maggot can be a huge issue. And so they have solid stemmed varieties which will prevent the stem maggot from burrowing down in the stem and causing damage. And there's lots of that and all of that I knew. But I did not know that wheat stem maggot also will affect corn. And in 2025 in Nebraska, they had fields with up to 50% of the corn crops killed by wheat stem maggot. Now that's the extreme, but they planted the corn into green residue, whether it was volunteer wheat or a seeded rye cover crop or something like that. And that green bridge, the wheat stem maggots moved out of the cereal crop into the corn crop, and you get what is called dead heart. It looks like the corn was sprayed with a graminicide, like a Shure. You know how you spray the volunteer corn in your soybeans with a graminicide, and you come out 2 weeks later, and the wheat or the corn crop plant rather looks kind of bad, and if you pull it out, the center of the plant comes out, and at the very base where the growing point is, it's dead and water soaked and ugly, rotten. Yep, same thing happens with wheat stem maggot in the corn crop, and it just looks like you sprayed that plant with a graminicide, and it is dead, and there is no rescue. The management is pretty simple. You have to make sure you kill that green cover crop at least 14 days before you plant the corn crop, but I never knew that wheat stem maggot would affect corn and could cause that much injury. So there's just one of those things that, there's so much out there that Wheat Pete doesn't know yet. All right, let's move on and talk briefly here about agronomy. So Tyler, my good friend Tyler from Onondaga in Twitter or X asked the question, how much nitrogen can we put in the strip in the spring and not cause injury? And this matters to everybody, not just strip tillers, because I talked about this last Monday night on the agronomists. From a nitrogen perspective, the work from Emerson Nafziger out of Nebraska, you need to have 50 parts per million nitrate nitrogen in the zone. So it's a 6-inch wide by 6-inch deep zone by 6 leaf corn. So It's 6 by 6 by 6 leaf. You need 50 parts per million. So all of us need to make sure we have enough nitrogen up front. And we learned that in 2025 again in Ontario. If you shortchanged yourself early on nitrogen, with the drought that we had, it cost you maybe up to 50 bushels per acre. So Tyler's question about how much nitrogen in the strip plays for all corn growers, and phenomenally interesting discussion around that. So Ben Rosser has finished his project there, and in Ben's research, he could put on far more nitrogen in that strip than we ever expected. Jonathan Zettler responding, another great agronomist, that he's done up to 100 pounds of nitrogen plus 60 pounds of potash. So it's not just the nitrogen in the strip. How much potash also matters, because potash is high salt. Nitrogen isn't salt, generally speaking. It's ammonia burn, but regardless. So 100 pounds of nitrogen plus 60 pounds of potash, some of it was protected nitrogen in that particular situation. In Ben's research, he could certainly do 250 pounds of urea in that strip, and he almost never saw injury. Meanwhile, Mark tweets back that he did 45 pounds of nitrogen as urea, another 45 pounds of nitrogen as coated urea, which should have been safe, and 60 pounds of actual potash. And he said he did it once because he will never do it again. And I also have had that experience with clients where with a shank strip tiller, if you do not get that fertilizer deep enough, you can have very significant impacts. We reduced a stand of 34,000 down to 21,000 because it didn't rain soon enough with spring strip till and too much nitrogen and potash in the blend. But it really is distribution in the strip. And this is true if you're not a strip tiller. Do you get too much salt in that top surface zone? We have seen on sand soils where we put all the nitrogen up front as urea, and then we add a starter pop-up fertilizer on the seed. The pop-up fertilizer, no way it should ever cause injury to the seed, but we had enough ammonia injury from that urea worked into the top 2 inches that we reduced the stand, where we added that 5 gallons of a very safe pop-up fertilizer on the seed. So this is a long dissertation to say that, man, you can get away with 100 pounds of nitrogen in that strip and with 60 pounds of potash if it's placed deep enough. As Sean Schill says, he gets at least 2 or 3 inches below his seed and spread out 3 inches wide. Or you can kill the seed if you get it too shallow and in too concentrated a band. So when Tyler asks that question, I become the best agronomist around. The answer is, it depends. Mark out of South Dakota saying, how about all upfront nitrogen with a nitrogen stabilizer and save a pass in my spring wheat crop here in South Dakota? Yeah, Mark, most of the time, upfront nitrogen is equal in yield to a split application. The split application, I can reduce lodging. I can do a much better job from an environmental standpoint. I don't have as much environmental impact, and I can do a better job of predicting what the right nitrogen rate is, but it takes a second pass and you need the rainfall. So all up front is generally, at least half the time, all up front will equal a split nitrogen application, and you save that pass in your spring wheat crop. Kevin saying, Peter, I've got thick ice already. This is before today because I think yesterday and today things have melted quite a bit, but how long can wheat survive under ice? And it's all about, does the ice freeze to the ground? We often kill the wheat at the bathtub ring. We get a lake or a pond in the field, and where the ice freezes to the ground is where the wheat will die. Underneath the ice, the water gets away, and if we have a few holes poked in that ice to let the oxygen in under the ice, that wheat crop will be okay. But it's going to warm up here over Christmas in Ontario. Hopefully that problem isn't a big deal. Dave saying, okay, Peter, What's the value of my manure? He sends me his analysis, his manure analysis. It's 24 pounds of ammonium nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. Spring applied, that should be a very direct contribution. But with manure, it just isn't always work out quite as simple as that. And I always use manure nitrogen cautiously, and I think part of it is immobilization. When you put that manure on, it's got lots of nitrogen there, but it really stimulates the biology in the soil as well, because there's so many other things there. There's organic matter as well, and your carbon to nitrogen ratio matters in manure. You stimulate the bugs in the soil like crazy, and sometimes those soil bugs will immobilize nitrogen. And this is one of the things we don't talk about enough, I think, is placement of the nitrogen residue, high carbon residue like corn stalks or wheat stover that gets in contact with that nitrogen, and a bunch of it gets immobilized or tied up by the soil bugs using that nitrogen to break down the carbon in the residue. And when it becomes immobilized, it isn't available immediately to the crop, and we have tremendous difficulty trying to predict when it's going to be available. So if you have lots of history of manure, I think that number of 24 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons is real. But if you don't have lots of manure in the history, it's a one-time application. You've got heavy amounts of residue there from either your awesome wheat crop or your mediocre corn crop. It's going to get tied up, and you have to use that nitrogen value with a grain of salt. Okay, I'm going to finish up here with the last, and I want to talk about knowledge, because it always drives me nuts how little I know. I didn't know that the stem maggot would affect corn. How did I miss that, man? I mean, they're both grass crops. I should have known that. Well, the estimates are that knowledge doubled every century pre-1900. So if knowledge doubles every century, well, you don't have to run quite so fast to keep up. Since 2000, knowledge has doubled every year. In 2025, the estimates are that knowledge has doubled every 12 hours. And I know I'm going to get some pushback, but with artificial intelligence and being able to access all the knowledge that is out there, you can just move forward that much faster. And so all it says to Peter is, oh my gosh, there is so much that I don't know. And so Santa, bring me more knowledge. And to all the word listeners, you want to make Pete's Christmas, just send me more information, ask me questions, give the feedback, because that's what I live on. And with that, happy holidays to everyone. Please take the time, as I said at the start. And that's it. That's all. On behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture, this is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, December 24th, last episode for 2025. Have an awesome holiday system. We'll see you in 2026.
Thank you for downloading this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Syngenta. Syngenta proudly offers qualified representatives who are ready to help your operation with tailored agronomic advice. Your Syngenta team wishes you a restful holiday break with family and looks forward to seeing you at a trade show this winter. Be sure to stop by the booth at CPS, Manitoba Ag Days, Ag Expo, or the Ontario Southwest Agriculture Conference.